Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel geared toward tuning you in to various theories of everything and how they might be used in a positive manner to enrich your life. And today is the 284th video that we have done on Dewey B. Larson's reciprocal system of theory. And the reciprocal system of theory is a theory of everything. Mr. Larson has books on wide-ranging topics from chemistry to physics to astronomy to economics to a book on metaphysics, which includes chapters on philosophy, religion, and psychology. And some of his followers have extended his theory to subjects such as cryptoarchaeology, and he also covers dream interpretation. If we do our job here, we can kind of coach you up to the point where you can take Larson's theory and you can use it yourself and apply it to the subject of your choice. That's a little way off. You know, you're going to have to be a good student. I'm going to have to be a good teacher for that. But the potential is there, and the theory is fascinating. And it's especially fascinating because nobody knows anything about this. I've been studying the reciprocal system since 2001. And in that whole time, 22 years, I have never met another person who has ever heard of it before. Not in person. I know that there are other people who've heard of it before, and there are quite a few of them that I know, through the internet and so on. But in person, I've never, ever met another person who's ever heard of it. So it makes me want to get up on, the rooftops and scream it. But people don't really listen when you do that. You know, they just get on their phone and call 911 or whatever. But today we are looking at actually one of Mr. Larson's followers. Not followers in terms of, a disciple or something like that, but someone who studied up on the reciprocal system himself and then began to apply it and apply it to the subjects that he cared about. And that's Dr. Bruce Perret, the late Dr. Bruce Perret, who died back in 2020. And he left behind a lot of great material that almost rivals Mr. Larson's oeuvre itself. Mr. Larson died back in 1990, by the way. And so, there are very few people that are still alive that are still working on this, as far as I know. But probably a lot more than I think. But the basic idea behind the reciprocal system is that we live in a universe of motion. The universe is made out of motion. And motion is the relationship between time and space. And that sets up a generalized reciprocal relationship between time and space. The most basic idea, the most basic kind of motion that we're familiar with is speed. The bicycle is moving at 15 miles per hour. 15 miles of space in 1 hour of time. Space over time. And you can see that reciprocal relationship if you decide that you want to double the speed. Now the bike is moving 30 miles per hour, doubling the speed. Now the bike is moving 30 miles per hour. But you can, so if you double the space, you're doubling the speed. But you can also say that the bicycle is moving 15 miles per half hour by dividing the time. So you get the same results if you double the speed or if you halve the time. That's a reciprocal relationship. 2 and 1/2 are reciprocals of each other. You know you have reciprocals when they multiply together and they get exactly 1. Those are reciprocals. 2 and 1/2, 3 and 1/3, 3/2 and 2/3. These are all reciprocals of one another. And in Larson's system, every kind of scientific phenomena that we can think of is a form of motion. Pressure is a form of motion. Electric current is a form of motion. Electric charge is a form of motion. Matter is a form of motion. Energy is a form of motion. Electrical capacitance, viscosity is a form of motion. Density is a form of motion. And they're all expressible using a fraction with space or time as the numerator and time or space as the denominator, with the caveats that Larson lists in his first fundamental postulate. He has 2 fundamental postulates that he came out with in the late 1950s, and they were the basis for all the books that he wrote. He basically had these 2 fundamental postulates, and from those he wrote he came up with his whole theoretical universe through a process of deduction. And I go through the steps of his deduction in about 15 videos that I did about 8 months ago called The Outline of the Deductive Development of the Reciprocal System. That shows the 165 steps that he took to get from his postulates all the way to, the farthest reaches of astronomy and, the farthest reaches of atomic physics. And that's another, so the first caveat is that space, now remember, space and time are reciprocal, so in general, they have the same exact qualities. Just like 3 and 1/3, they have the same qualities. That's 3. But one of them, 3 is in the numerator, and the other 3 is in the denominator. And vice versa. In one is in the numerator and 1 is in the denominator, or vice versa. Now, when you're talking about time and space, they both have the same qualities. So one of those qualities is they are coordinate, meaning that they have multiple dimensions, 3 or maybe even more dimensions, x, y, z coordinates on a graph. They're 3-dimensional. We're accustomed to that idea with space, not so much with time. But time then also does have 3 dimensions, or at least has an aspect of its, of itself that is 3 or more dimensions. The second stipulation is that they are both scalar. They both, what Larson calls clock time and clock space. A scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no direction. And it's called scalar because it expresses different scales. It's the same thing regardless of the scale. And this holds true with Larson's theory. The same rules that he applies to atomic physics are the same rules that he applies to astronomical physics. Even though one is very, very, very small and one is very, very, very large, he uses the same rules. And so once you learn the rules, you can apply them to whatever scale that you're on. Now, the basic scalar motion is a fundamental part of Larson's system, so it's good to try to understand it pretty well. the basic idea with clock time is that the clock is always getting later and later and later and later. That is a motion that has no particular direction or no specific direction, or you could say it's in all directions. The clock is always getting later and later and later. Now, we're accustomed to that idea of the clock ticking, the progression of time or the flow of time. But what we're not so familiar with is clock space. Clock space is a scalar motion in space. And you can envision this using a balloon with a bunch of dots on it. You blow up the balloon, and all the dots are going to be moving away from each other, but in no specific direction. That you could think of as the flow of space. If you want to fill in the center of that balloon and not just be on the surface, you can think of it in terms of raisin bread. If you put the raisin bread in the oven and start cooking it, all the raisins, as the bread rises, all the raisins will be moving away from each other. That is a scalar motion. And, you know, say if you have some kind of super yeast or something like that, you can put the bread in the oven and it might just be this size, but when you bake it, maybe it blows up to this size. So, you know, it has different scales that it, you know, will occupy. But the rules will be the same at every point along the line. You know, so the scalar motion is something that you can measure the magnitude of, but ultimately in the reciprocal system, everything works the same regardless of what the scale is. Now, there are some caveats to that too, but that's the general basis of that. Now, the one of the caveats, so I will just say that also in terms of clock space, the Hubble telescope has measured this in noting that all of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. So that is another way of thinking about the flow of space, or the progression of space, a scalar motion in space. Now, the third caveat is that space and time are quantized, meaning that there is a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time. They're both very small, but if you don't have a full unit of space, then you don't have space. And if you don't have a full unit of time, then you don't have time. Or I would say you have zero space and zero time. Or you have to have a full unit before you have anything. And then if you want to move up to a second unit, then you have to have a full second unit, or you just have one. So that's the discrete unit postulate. And if you have exactly 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, and remember, we identified space over time as speed. If you have 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, you have the speed of light. 1 over 1 equals 1. And so Larson calls the speed of light unit speed. And for Larson, and for a universe of motion, you know, the first thing that you have to be able to do to understand a universe of motion is you have to understand that there is motion even before there is anything moving. Motion precedes the thing that's moving because it's a universe of motion. That's the most fundamental thing that there is the motion. And the thing that's moving actually is motion itself. Matter is a form of motion. In Larson's system, motion is space to the time to the third power over space to the third power. That is the equation for matter. Just in the same way that the equation for speed is space over time. And if you actually want to plug it in, you've got 2/3 of the parts there already. If of E equals mc squared, energy equals matter times the speed of light squared. Okay, so we said matter is time to the third power over space to the third power, and speed is space over time. You got to square that. E equals mc squared, c being the speed of light. So the c squared is s to the second power over t to the second power. You multiply those out and you get t over s. That is energy. Energy is time over space. Energy is time over space, and speed is space over time. Matter is space to the third power, time to the third power over space to the third power. And so using that is a great way of checking all of the classical equations that the legacy scientists have come up with, and seeing how they balance out. They should balance out if the equation is correct, or if Larson's assignment of dimensions to them are correct. In one case, Larson did assign the wrong dimensions to electrical capacitance that eventually had to be corrected by Dr. Bruce Perret. Or at least that's what I think. It could be wrong, but it seems to check out. So that's the thing about Larson's system, is it usually checks out. You can determine over the course of time whether you've plugged it in correctly or not. And Larson admitted that. Okay, now basically, if you have the speed of light as your background speed, that is the speed that's always occurring. You have half the universe that is moving. So the speed of light is basically the neutral point, or the 0 point. So you have half the universe moving faster than the speed of light, and half of the universe moving slower than the speed of light. Larson calls those the cosmic sector and the material sector, respectively. We know very, very, very little about the cosmic sector, science-wise, but we know just about everything about the material sector. But because of the reciprocal postulate, we can determine or extrapolate to determine what's going on in the cosmic sector, because what's going on over there is exactly the same as what's going on in the material sector, except that you have to reverse the roles of space and time. Simply, in the material sector, you have coordinate space, 3 dimensions of space, and clock time. Clock is always getting later and later and later. In the cosmic sector, you have coordinate time, 3-dimensional time, and clock space. Space is always getting farther and farther apart. So that is just a simple example of how the two sectors are identical in function in general, except that you have to invert the roles of space and time. Okay, now Larson took that postulate along with the second postulate, which is that the universe conforms to the relationships of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. And the Euclidean geometry has also been contested by Dr. Bruce Perret, who contends that the geometry is actually projective, although Euclidean geometry is a subset of projective geometry. So it's not a complete rejection, but just an expansion of the geometry by Perret. But now Dr. Perret has written an article here that we're going to look at. Today is, I believe, the 6th episode. So if you want to start the article at the beginning, you want to go back about 5 episodes. But this article is written by Daniel Phoenix III, which is Perret's pen name that he uses when he writes things that are a little bit more speculative in nature. And Perret has a wild imagination, and he's imbibed a lot of science fiction in his time. And so he does get into things that are very speculative at times. And um, this is no exception. This article is called Geoengineering, Chemtrails, HARP, Timelines, and Ascension. And we are about to begin the section here that is called ELE and Ascension. ELE stands for Extinction Level Events. And ELEs are not an end, but simply a time of change. Happens all the time in nature. Happened with the dinosaurs, the hominids, uncountable millions of insects, bugs, and varieties of plant life. Recent summaries say that the number of species going extinct has increased 1,000-fold compared to a century ago. But they aren't just disappearing, they are evolving. And that is what is supposed to be happening with mankind and other intelligent life forms on Earth. Humans are only the dominant species, not the only intelligent one. If the globalists had not started messing around with geoengineering and genetics some 50 years ago, humanity would have already been in the transition phase to a more complex form of life, a higher density expression of consciousness. All the GMO foodstuffs we are exposed to on a daily basis, combined with the chemicals used in climate modification, has delayed certain natural processes from being initiated. In Dewey Larson's book Beyond Space and Time, which incidentally we read into the record on this channel over the course of about 85 or 90 videos, probably about 4 or 5 months ago, if you'd like to go into that book. In Dewey Larson's book Beyond Space and Time, he discusses the life unit, the origins of the living cell, and the biological level of existence. One of the more salient points concerning biological structure is that it mimics stellar behavior. Again, scale. The rules are the same regardless of what kind of scale you're talking about, whether you're on astronomical stellar scale, or whether you're on microscopic scale, or whether you're on human scale. You are dealing with the same rules. So structure is that it mimics life, mimics stellar behavior. Life is composed of a stable combination of matter and antimatter. Antimatter being called cosmic matter from the cosmic sector in the reciprocal system that exists in three-dimensional time, coordinate time. This linkage also has its sublight below the speed of light, spatial body, and faster than light, or cosmic body, or time, three-dimensional time body components. Our temporal mind or soul is what Perret calls it, the soul. That's our temporal mind, or the same aspect as the body, counterpart to the body, or the reciprocal of the body. And even continues one step beyond that into the realm of ethics and metaphysics, hence the title Beyond Space and Time. Life has remarkable similarities to the various stages of stellar evolution observed by astronomers when the evolutionary direction is corrected. Because, as he pointed out earlier in this article, the astronomers' system of stellar evolution is backwards. They think that the oldest stars are actually the newest stars, and the newest stars are actually the oldest stars. So back in high school, you might have learned that saying, "Be a fine girl, kiss me." Oh, be a fine girl, kiss me. That is OBAF That is the legacy science's evolution of stars. So you start with an O star, and then a B star, and then an A star, and then an F star. But in Perret is saying that in Larson's system, it's actually backwards, and it goes, and the O star is actually the last one on the evolutionary scale. So you would have to come up with a new little saying there. Stars are born from a cloud of dirt and make a body. The infusion of a soul as the compression of matter reaches faster than light motion, and its eventual death in the glory of a supernova. Life can be thought of as twin suns, one in space and one in time, linked together in a controlled explosion of energy, such that all the thermal extremes cancel each other out. As Delenn from the show Babylon 5 stated, we are star stuff and are inexorably or inexorably tied to the stellar and planetary processes of the solar system. We have scratched the surface of these associations with concepts such as astrology and metaphysics, but only scratched. The problem that has arisen is that for the last 50 years or so, we've been blocked off from our genetic inheritance by geo and genetic engineering. The proper signals to do a life unit upgrade were not received when they should have been. Kind of like those people at the gym that wear headphones and don't see the basketball bouncing toward their face, despite people yelling, "Look out!" They eventually get hit in the face, and they are totally caught by surprise because they're wearing headphones. Time to rip the headphones off of people and let them hear the warning signs and the signal to upgrade their psyche. There is still hope, but I don't mean from extraterrestrials. Okay, this section is called Resetting Genetic Modifications. And let's see if we have time to get into this. I think we should probably wait until the next session. And yeah, I'm sorry I probably went too long in my earlier explanation of the basics of the reciprocal system and didn't have enough time to get into Dr. Perret's paper here. But, you know, it's pretty heavy stuff, so, you know, take it in small doses. And I think it's good. I try to explain the reciprocal system differently every time I explain it. And so you have a collection here on this channel of 284 different explanations of the same thing. And so, you know, hopefully every time, you know, it doesn't get that stale, that I bring in some new information or put together new information in a different way each time I explain it. And so you can, because probably the best way to learn this stuff is through repetition, just hearing it over and over and over again, reading it over and over and over again until it kind of sinks in, because you have to be able to really unlearn things before you can learn them, and you unlearn them by kind of being confronted with the opposite or a diverging viewpoint. Okay, well, thank you for tuning in today, and we'll get to the next section here called Resetting Genetic Modifications starting tomorrow. Have a great day.